All right, let's jump right into this explainer and deconstruct a standard historical narrative. Today, we're taking a really close look at the age of industrialization, specifically aiming to unpack what actually happened during this fascinating chapter of history. Now, we often picture this era as an overnight explosion of massive factories, steam, and smoke, right? But we're going to use the historical sources to see what the Industrial Revolution actually looked like on the ground. Here's our roadmap for today. First, visions of modern progress. Second, the slow pace of change. Third, hand labor over machines. Fourth, the fate of Indian weavers. And finally, redefining the industrial age. Let's get into it. Section 1. Visions of modern progress. The myth of the machine. Take a look at this 1900 sheet music cover. It brilliantly illustrates the myth we were just talking about. Right at the center, you can see this goddess-like figure, the Angel of Progress, bearing the flag of the new century. She's gently perched on a wheel with wings, symbolizing time, just floating magically into the future. And look at what's surrounding her. Railways, cameras, printing presses, and factories. This intense glorification of machines deeply ingrained this idea in the public imagination that industrialization was purely a magical, seamless leap forward. And this image completely builds on that same utopian vibe. It's a 1901 trade magazine illustration titled Two Magicians. Notice the stark contrast here. You have Aladdin's ancient lamp representing the so-called Oriental past, positioned right below the supposedly superior, triumphant magic of the modern Western mechanic. So Aladdin builds palaces with a magic lamp, but the mechanic? He builds bridges, ships, and towers with modern tools. Images like this offered a triumphant account that equated the modern world entirely with rapid technological change, essentially making history look like a simple, wonderful story of upward development. Section 2. The slow pace of change. The reality. Now, what's really fascinating about the actual history is how sharply it contrasts with those magical illustrations. When we compare the myth to the reality, the crucial point to remember is that the process of industrialization was not incredibly rapid at all. I mean, we picture everyone suddenly leaving their farms to go work in massive mills, right? But the reality? Even at the very end of the 19th century, less than 20% of the total workforce was actually employed in these advanced industrial sectors. The vast majority of production was still happening in small workshops and bylanes that historians often forget about when they're dazzled by the big factories. To really put this agonizingly slow pace into perspective, I want you to hear this surprising number: 321. At the beginning of the 19th century, there were no more than 321 steam engines in all of England. Just let that sink in for a second. The steam engine is quite literally the ultimate symbol of the industrial age, yet there were only 321 of them across the entire nation. If we break down exactly where those engines were being used, it gets even more interesting. 80 were in cotton, 9 in wool, and 232 were scattered across mining and ironworks. The craziest part about this is the story of James Watt. He improved the steam engine and patented it way back in 1781, and his friend Matthew Boulton manufactured it. But for years, they literally could not find buyers. Industrialists just weren't purchasing these machines immediately, which proves that the adoption was incredibly cautious and slow. Section 3. Hand labor over machines. The era had a really fascinating dynamic going on. Machines were great for mass-producing identical, standardized goods, think military uniforms. But in Victorian Britain, aristocrats and the upper classes actually demanded specific, intricate shapes. Handmade products came to symbolize refinement and high class. To give you an idea of how specific this got, in mid-19th century Britain, there were 500 different varieties of hammers being produced. Machines simply couldn't handle that level of variety. Only human hands could craft them. Because of this demand, a massive portion of textile output was produced outside of factories entirely, resting squarely within domestic family units. Looking at this 18th century home illustration, you can see how each family member is involved in the production of yarn, with one person turning a wheel that moves just a single spindle. This traditional, small-scale production was the lifeblood of the economy, and it certainly didn't just magically disappear overnight. Section 4. The fate of Indian weavers. As Britain's hybrid industrial economy expanded, it required massive amounts of raw textiles. This fundamentally disrupted lives globally, a reality we see incredibly starkly in colonial India. The East India Company needed regular supplies of cotton and silk, and they used a very deliberate, aggressive process to secure them. First, they appointed paid servants called gomastas to closely supervise the weavers and examine cloth quality. Second, they offered advance loans, essentially legally tying the weavers to the company so they couldn't sell to anyone else. And third, they paid miserably low prices for the finished goods. The tragic reality on the ground was that these Indian weavers were completely stripped of their bargaining power. If you took an advance, you were tied to the company through debt. The conditions became so dire that in many places across Karnataka and Bengal, weavers deserted their villages entirely, migrating just to set up looms with relatives elsewhere. And when they couldn't flee, they revolted, clashing directly with company officials and the Gamastas. Section 5. Redefining the Industrial Age. Placing these realities side by side gives us a much truer, more complicated picture of the age. We absolutely cannot just focus on the dazzling smokestacks of Lancashire that tend to dominate our history books. We have to remember the simultaneous persistence of the small workshops, the families hand-spinning at home, and the devastating global colonial impact on workers like the Indian weavers. The industrial age wasn't just a magical leap forward. It was a messy blend of rapid technological progress for some and agonizingly slow change or severe disruption for others. So the crucial takeaway here is to question that simple, streamlined narrative of progress. Knowing the true human cost, the persistence of hand labor, and the incredibly complex reality on the ground, I want to leave you with this provocative thought, straight from our source text. Can we today continue to glorify the continuous mechanization of all work? What does industrialization truly mean to people's actual, everyday lives? Think about that as you reflect on this explainer. Thanks for diving into the source material with me today.